So I'm joined today by Kim Chadwick, Global Head of Markets Compliance for Societe Generale, focused primarily on the advisory compliance side of things. I reference that because we're trying to put together videos with a variety of compliance, legal, risk and audit backgrounds. But what I wanted to do, and the point of this podcast really, is to ask the questions that people don't often talk about and get to bits and pieces so that the future generations can learn whatever, the quick tips to get to the top or the bits and pieces that they may not have considered before. Well, let's start with the exchange, because actually in the generation that we've been through in these markets, that's probably one of the biggest shifts and changes for most people, right?
Yeah.
Open outcry, loads of people down on the floor, everyone doing their business face to face suddenly becomes electronic.
Yeah.
The mental shift and the change and the job changes overnight. And
oh, I mean, you know, there's a lot of people who look at the life market with rose-tinted specs. I don't.
Yeah.
It was an awful place to work. So, you know, you maybe had about 3,000 people in lots of designated areas for different contracts. It was my job as an exchange official to basically report to the people in the pit, whether that was the Eurodollar pit or the gilt pit, what the current market price was, and that was using hand signals.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds terribly glamorous, but the reality is that there were a lot of competing, you know, if it was 6 bid at 7 and somebody shouts 8 trades over there, you had to bust that trade because the market was 6 bid at 7. And that resulted in me being insulted, shall we say, on a regular basis.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So there weren't many women who actually did that role because it was quite a tough thing. But yeah, so with the gradual electronification of that market and of it going on screen, yeah, it was a significant change. So all of a sudden, instead of, you know, me standing next to you in that pit, it was just a computer screen.
Yeah.
Brought more transparency to the market. I think that was the argument at the time.
Yeah, yeah. But actually, there's probably a good reflection point for us, because that, in my eyes, is the first time you saw a load of business guys move into compliance roles. If I look around the city, especially equity derivatives advisory, a lot of the senior people were on that life floor back in the day, right?
Yes, there's still quite a few of us around, indeed. Absolutely. I mean, the bottom line is that all those guys who were open outcry traders were all out of a job.
Yeah.
A lot of them became London cab drivers.
Yeah.
And then some of them were lucky enough to move into compliance roles, which was sort of, I don't want to say fledgling role then, but it wasn't a career path.
Yeah, yeah.
Most people went into compliance like myself, ended up in compliance sort of by sort of default, really.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Oh, and since then, compliance teams have grown, right? And there's been periods of growth and periods of shrinkage or whatever. But the reality is, when all of that change first happened, a lot of compliance were only 3, 4, 5 heads and could be 1,500 heads globally now, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And there were no MDs in compliance right at the beginning. They were very much viewed in the same way as sort of like operations is, that we don't need anybody higher than a VP in that sphere, for sure. If I think back to when I was at Nomura, when we took over the Lehman business, for example, I had in the fixed income space 650 certified individuals and a team of 6 or 7 covering them.
Yeah.
You know, I've got a team of 9 at the moment covering 200.
Yeah.
So that's quite a good
yeah.
indication of how things have, you know, progressed over the years.
And to get to become a global head, do you need to have done a bit of everything, or you need to have been
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There isn't anything I haven't covered.
Yeah, yeah. And have you ever had times where you're asked to take a new area that you haven't covered before and you're thinking, I feel uncomfortable, or?
No. And that's probably largely through experience. You know, I think any compliance officer with 10 years plus experience should be able to adapt to a different asset class.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we tend to see at the junior end, 1 to 5 years experience, moving to a different area is very common, right? And normally because firms will support it and train, but also because people are inquisitive and want to learn. And then it feels as if there's kind of like almost a trap, if that makes sense. Like when you're in that VP level, not many people move from one VP role and area to another one, right? But once you get into senior leadership, if you're seen as a leader, you can jump from being the head of legal to being the head of compliance, if that makes sense. So if you were to give a piece of advice to yourself starting back in your career, what would that piece of advice be?
Well, if you're not, so you obviously, if you want to move or broaden your experience, you talk to your management and say, you know, express an interest in that. And if there's no ability to do that, then unfortunately you have to go and seek it elsewhere. And I would encourage them to come and speak to somebody like yourself about how they should do that. I don't necessarily want to lose them, but
well, that's why I ask. It's remarkable how often I speak to senior people who tell me about whatever, these are the 5 that I really want to grow and progress in my team. And then one of that team will reach out and say, oh, I feel like progression doesn't exist here, right? And I think a lot of the time it's because people are scared to go and have that conversation. Because the senior leader is thinking that is someone I want to grow, but the individual doesn't engage in that discussion, or the leader chooses not to engage in that discussion. And
I suppose, also management have to be quite honest if there really isn't anywhere for them to go. Well, that's a tough conversation too, but again, I think you need to be absolutely clear with the individuals about what you can do for them. So, if there are no opportunities to be promoted, for example, can I give them other areas whereby there's still some ability to develop that person? So, is, for me, I want a super team that, is super smart, because that informs better decision making. So, so, obviously we can't all be MDs and directors. So you've got to think a little bit laterally as to, if you want to keep this person and they're expressing an interest to develop, grow, and there is no promotion, then you have to think of something else that you might be able to offer them that will satiate their request.
So when you first had to make the transition into compliance, how do you get yourself up to speed quickly? Oh, that's easier said than done. I was quite fortunate that the manager who hired me at Goldman invested a lot of time in me. And so whilst I worked incredibly long hours, if I started to be any good as a compliance officer, it was because of the time that he invested in me. Taking the time to explain, how you look at things from the other side, if you like. What does incredibly long hours mean?
Starting at 7:30 and not finishing until after 9.
And that was every day, or?
Pretty much, and I was a single parent at that particular point as well.
Realistically, 7:30 a.m. till 9 p.m. with kids, etc. Just doesn't add up, right?
There's no point in trying to convince people that you can have it all. There is a trade-off. Absolutely.
100%. And in that, guys, I guess my question really is, what can you do to make a difference when you're trying to grow? If you can't do 7:30 a.m. till 9 p.m., which I don't think we're suggesting anyone does nowadays.
No, definitely not.
What can you do to make a difference? If someone joins your team now at associate level and gets their opportunity, they're on your rotation scheme or something like that, how do you stand out?
That's a good question. Well, I think that if you're hired into my broader team now, is that I still interview everybody, but is you've made it into the team, you're already standing out. We are quite diligent in terms of the sorts of scenarios that we give people. A lot of the scenarios I give people in an interview are not, there's not always a yes or a no or right answer, if you like. It's just to see where their instincts are. So they might not get to the right conclusion, but their work through in terms of how they got there actually shows that that's somebody we can work with. I think it's very important as a manager to share information. So, and by the way, I want the cleverest people in the team, the smartest people, not necessarily the cleverest, the smartest people in the team, so that by sharing all that information, they get that exposure, and we've got a few very, very good juniors at the moment, and they're keen, they're in the office, they are not afraid to say I don't understand, and they switch their camera on. if it's not a face-to-face meeting.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, that's really sort of basic stuff.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
You know, is the importance? I know it seems to be a bit of a well-worn record, or is that being in person makes all the difference.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I've just spent the last 3 weeks travelling to various jurisdictions in the course of my work to go and build relationships in those jurisdictions, and I learnt more in half an hour than I've learnt in the previous 6 months.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be underestimated, you know, just that chat by the coffee machine, or somebody passing by the desk for a quick chat.
Yeah.
And, ooh, while I'm here, maybe I could ask you about X.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen on screen.
On screen. Do you think, like, what are the reasons behind that? So when I reflect on the recruitment side, now if I have a briefing with you, it's pre-arranged, it's pre-planned, it's at a set time, it's until a set time, you appear, you tell us what you're looking for, and then that's the end of that. So when I think about the bits I miss out on, it's all the chit chat and everything else that leads to other bits and the pieces, right? In the past, if I came down to your office, normally HR would come meet us, we'd have a conversation on the way, but the conversation on the way tends to be about the other roles and the other stuff that's going on, so we're getting up to speed with more than just our little window. And then once we're there, we'd sit and have a chat afterwards, or we'll all sit and have a chat if there's other agencies, etc. And you just gain so much more information, which you just don't get now, when it's literally we dial on at 10 and we dial off at 10:30.
Yeah.
Do you think that's the case then for the business? So it's because everything's purpose-led, or when you're there you get a different exposure, or?
I mean, why is it like that?
Yeah.
Well, I think I wouldn't underestimate the effect that COVID's had and the hangover that we've still got because of that.
Yeah, yeah.
It just isn't the norm. I'm not socialising half as much as I did pre-COVID.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm not sure that people are sort of actively sitting there saying, I don't want to socialise, or I don't want to have that meeting, or whatever. There's been a societal shift. I don't think that, I'm not a particular fan of it, I have to be honest, but I'm also guilty to a certain extent.
Yeah, it is remarkable, because I thought that during the COVID time, I wonder if this shuts down international travel. And again, when I reflect from my industry, the amount of times, we've got Singapore, Hong Kong, a variety of other offices. When we first opened Singapore, I'd go over for a week every 3 months. And each time I'd go and spend the evening with compliance officers, right? I'd go out for dinner with people or whatever. The amount of times I'd go out for dinner with someone that we're already working with, and at some point during the evening, there's a moment they go, oh, actually, I haven't told you about this role over here. I haven't told you about this role over here. We're going to need you to help us with stuff like that. And I never knew, is that time, or that's trust, or like, what is it that creates that? But that's definitely disappeared for me if I don't see people face to face. When I'm only on a screen, all I get is the information they wish to give at that point in time. Yeah,
no, I mean, that's the same with the day job, right?
Yeah.
It is that, you know, I'm in the office 4 or 5 days a week, I don't get the information that I need sat at home in order for me to do my job properly. And, you know, that is, you've got to be there to be. I do feel for people just coming into the industry now. It's quite a tough gig. And, you know, I say my advice to them is be seen. Be there. You know, even if it's not 5 days a week. You know, get in as much as you can. You know, that's sort of what you can learn off watching somebody's body language. It's invaluable.
Okay, and what about learning then? So within that advisory world, is it better for someone, generally, someone gets a chance with you guys, whatever, they're in a rates seat, is it better to become an expert on rates, or is it better to try and get some exposure to other bits and pieces? If I'm going to go above and beyond, do I go and speak to someone in equities to learn from them, or?
Well, I mean, we've got natural people assigned to, you know, the various asset classes, generally speaking, but I'm a big fan of rotation. And I think that's the, I would say, problem that some of the bigger banks have, is that when you go into the advisory function there, you could be just covering, you know, FX corporate sales. Well, that's a very narrow field. And I think one of the joys about coming to work at SocGen, for example, are the ability to, you know, we will give you the opportunity if you want to rotate, or if you want to cover different areas, we will endeavour to facilitate that. And we certainly do it for our youngsters. So, I think that's very important to create that sort of fully rounded compliance advisor.
Yeah, yeah. Can people transition across? Is it more natural for someone in compliance but a different piece of compliance to make that move than a lawyer or a business professional making the move? Or
well, interestingly, in my team in Paris, we recently, actually in the last couple of weeks, we've just taken on somebody from audit. Now, they've been in audit for the last 5 or 6 years, but prior to that, they were a fixed salesperson. Mm-hmm. And my question always for when somebody in the front office moves to, or is indicating they might like a move into compliance is, can a business facilitator become a business control? Mm-hmm. And not everybody, we've talked about it a little bit earlier in terms of surveillance moving into advisory, but the same rule applies, is that mindset change. And what's interesting in this particular case is we have a person who's joined the compliance team, and when I was doing the interview, sort of testing their sort of whether they really have made that transition from facilitator to control. They had indeed, with some vigour and vim.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that it's always quite interesting, and you see this when the business people become senior managers, for example. Yeah. Is that they've always been accountable. Yeah. But simply by giving them this sort of statement of responsibility and you're responsible for this, that and the other, really changes the way they think. Yeah. And it's where our role becomes really very important, is that they become the sort of almost a religious zealot in terms of, right, oh, what do you mean he's done something wrong? Oh, we must fire him, da-di-da. And then it's trying to bring them back to the middle ground. And I think that's one of the most valuable things that we as advisors do, is that idea of being a trusted advisor. We don't need to go, yes, because that'll set a precedent and we'll end up having to fire the rest of the trading floor type of thing. Yeah, yeah. But it's, yes, it's quite the thing.
So would you say mindset is the thing that changes it, or attitude? The reason I ask when I say mindset is I see loads of lawyers move into compliance, and people regularly say to me, legal is black or white, whereas compliance is often operating in the grey areas, if that makes sense.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And I think I could list examples of people who have done brilliantly and made the transition and are rated and highly regarded, etc. But most of them, and actually I'll try and get some of them on this podcast, right? But most of them would tell me it probably took about 6 months to mentally adapt from the way you're trained as a lawyer to understanding what you need to be a good compliance officer.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I suppose that for years, compliance was the poor relation to legal, and we were paid accordingly. But, yes, what we've seen as compliance has, risen in terms of importance, that you see legal people moving across to compliance. Can be a little bit wary. It's useful to have a lawyer in a compliance team when you want to have a deep dive in some regulation that is still being developed and where we can possibly have an influence. Yeah. Quite useful then. I think on the flip side is that the advice can be very long, lengthy, and intricate, and that the sort of verbal advice on sort of like can be quite difficult for lawyers in terms of that sort of pressurised environment whereby somebody's at your desk and they want an answer now. Yeah. When in actual fact what they prefer to do is take the question away and go and think about it for quite some time. Yeah. And then bring it back in fully formed with, sort of lots of optionality and things like that. Often we do not have that luxury as a compliance advisor.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting as well when you talk about I think you use the phrase poor relative or whatever. What we have definitely seen from our side of the fence is ultimately if legal and compliance end up reporting into the same place, which on the buy side especially they often do, ultimately the top of the tree has to be a lawyer, because you have to be qualified legally to run the function, whereas you don't have to be qualified to run a compliance function, right?
Correct. unless you're in Germany.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's important and useful to know.
Yeah.
And those, so one of the things we cover a lot on the podcast is difference in regulations between countries, and even on an employment level in Germany, most firms you can only resign 4 days a month, right? At quarter end, there's an official period where you can leave, and then you've got to work your notice. So recruiting for those areas is so different to recruiting to anywhere else in the world.
Well, yes, and it's also difficult to manage people out in those jurisdictions in Europe because of the labour laws. So, you know, there isn't historically the pool of talent for sort of wholesale banking on the continent as there is maybe in the UK and Hong Kong and New York.
Mm-hmm. So do you have any interview advice or tips for people?
Oh, yes. Well, first of all, you should dress very smartly, as smart as you possibly can. Presentation is still very important. And if you're not taking care about your presentation, then it doesn't give me a lot of confidence that you're going to care about the role that I want to give you. The other thing is to put your camera on if you can't attend in person. I think what was quite interesting, actually kind of soul destroying really, is my son recently had an interview and the people who were interviewing him, he put his camera on, but the people who were interviewing him did not put their camera on. I mean, how soul-destroying is that?
Yeah.
What message is that sending to these poor young people trying to make their way in the world, that there's somebody who showing such a lack of respect in terms of not even putting their camera on to interview them? I think that's sad.
It gets worse because that is something we're told frequently, that people have done online interviews and the person interviewing them hasn't turned their camera on. And when I say it gets worse, I've got countless stories, not only of people not having turned the camera on, but then when I get the interview feedback, the feedback is that they struggle to build rapport with the person on the screen. And often the candidate, we always encourage candidates, phone us up afterwards and tell us your feedback for the interview, right? And I think a lot of people struggle to understand why they would phone us and give a bit of a recap, if that makes sense. But actually so frequently, and I'll do it with yourself, right? So hopefully you'll back me up to a level or shut me down here. But I just mean that if someone does an interview with you and they walk out and they go, do you know what, Kim asked me 10 technical questions, 9 of them I think I got right, 1 of them I've walked out and I've realised instantly I've got it wrong. Yeah. When they then tell me what it is, I message you instantly saying, can we speak? And I go, before you tell me they're a no, they know they made this mistake, like, can we move on, or can we acknowledge it, or just whatever? So you may have a view on that or not. But on the flip side of things, for someone to say to me, I struggle to build rapport to someone where they're just staring at a black screen with a name written there is...
It's impossible, isn't it?
Yeah.
How is that? Is that that should not happen.
Yeah. Really,
it should not happen. It doesn't do the firm that's hiring any favours.
Yeah.
And it certainly doesn't help the candidate.
Yeah. So here's a hypothetical one for you. So one of the big banks, to get a first round interview with them, you have to do an online screening interview with a robot. You get asked 8 questions and you've got 3 attempts at each answer. How's that make you feel? What's your experience?
Well, funnily enough, my son had one of those last week, my other son. It was... he described it as awful. It just made him think he didn't want to be employed by that firm. Yeah, even though he needs a job.
Yeah.
So,
but that's so much of it. That's such a powerful message, right? Well, one of the things that we have frequently is people don't realise that this really is a two-way process. Yes, you're picking whether this person is good enough for you or right for you or an appropriate fit for you, but also a lot of the time the individuals have got a number of processes on the go and it's a chance for you to stand out. And we definitely see that. People phone us up and I say, where do you want to go? And they say, well, whatever, I've ddone 4 rounds with 2 different places. One of them I've been in 3 times. I've done 1 online, but I've met people and I've got a feel for the place. The other one I've done 4 online. don't
It's
feel
a no-brainer.
anything. Yeah,
It's a no-brainer. It's we try and do all of our ones in person.
Yeah.
And really, I want to sell the company to them. And, you know, this is a great place. These are the sorts of things we can teach you. These are the sorts of things you'll be engaged with.
Yeah.
The exposure you will get.
Yeah.
You know, it is a two-way street.
Yeah.
You know, and we want them to come and work for us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And if people forget that, then...
Oh, 100%. From a recruitment angle, sorry, I'm just trying to think the right way to phrase this again, but I enjoy recruiting for you because you're active in the process, if that's the right way to describe it, right? So when we speak, you know what's going on, you know where the candidates are at, you're clearly getting feedback from people, etc. There's a variety of people that we work with where all of it functions through someone else and you don't necessarily know what's going on. But also in that, guys, we try and make sure we've met every candidate face-to-face in advance. And I could definitely give times, and actually you've got one in your team now where you've got a role and we've got a candidate who's not right for it, i.e. they don't have the product skill set that your gap is now, but I've met them and gone, do you know what? Personality-wise, like intellect-wise, the way they come across, their desire to learn, grow, develop, please do me a favour and meet this person. And you're actually one of the few people out there that's like, okay, well, I'll take your word, I'll give him a chance. And I think it prospers, right?
Yes, absolutely. I don't understand why people don't get that.
Yeah.
It's, we go back to that COVID hangover. I don't think it can just be that, though.
Yeah. Oh, there's definitely, I use the phrase frequently, clicking out of COVID, because I feel like I've struggled to do it, if that makes sense. Maybe my life has changed, right, with a young child and less time, etc. But I used to shave first thing every morning. I used to wear a full suit every day. Like, I mean, even sat here now, I haven't got my tie on. Now, I think the world has probably moved to a place where not having a tie is semi-acceptable. But if I'm honest, if I work from home, I'm probably wearing shorts and a t-shirt. And maybe it's a psychological thing, but I definitely don't feel like I take myself as seriously if I'm not kind of ready to go.
Sure. I think the only thing I'd say about working from home, which I do maybe sometimes on Friday, is that I tend to work longer hours at home.
Yeah.
I don't think that's necessarily true for everybody, but certainly I'm online for a lot longer.
Yeah.
And you're right, is that somehow I think that I'm subconsciously trying to compensate for the fact that I'm not in the office.
Yeah.
I don't think about where I am when I'm in the office, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm at home, I'm constantly, if I'm away from my desk now, how long have I been away?
Yeah.
You know, I've been here. And there are lots of distractions at home, but I'm constantly thinking about time.
Yeah.
Whereas when I'm in the office, I'm not thinking about time at all. I'm off here, off there, talking to this person at this committee, you know, at this transaction call, not thinking about it at all. I think that's quite an interesting output of how I think about, that different way you think about where you are.
Yeah. Mindset shift. Well, when you reflect back on the places that you've worked over the years, and Jimmy, you've worked a variety of houses, I'm guessing, a variety of cultures. Do certain people fit in certain businesses and wouldn't fit in others? Like, can you have the same skill set and be a success at American bank but not a European, or do well at a French and not a German? Or
that's quite an interesting question. I've done a fair few of those. I mean, certainly there are cultural differences. Different, you know, even at European, German versus French bank.
Yeah.
Culture's very different. And then you've got the American banks there, that's another thing. I suppose some people will be naturally more in tune with certain cultures than others, but I think that's I've been reluctant to bucket people in that. I think that a good compliance officer can work within any cultural, as long as they're kind of sensitive to the cultural differences, I suppose.
Yeah. And so what about other skill sets in that context then? So if I'm working in surveillance and I want to come and work in advisory, what can I do to get myself to a position where that's plausible?
Well, first of all, you should be expressing an interest into getting a seat on the floor, if possible.
Yeah.
And explaining why you want to do that. Clearly, they're very different roles.
Yeah.
Right. So you've got a more process-driven role versus an advisory. It's not everybody can switch that mindset from that from process to advisory, and I've seen a lot of people that haven't made that transition, to be honest. And I can't cope with the free flow nature of sort of like, I come in the morning, press the button, I run the process, and it spits out some alerts, and then I go and do that. Whereas, the sort of questions we get are, I can't come in, I can't say, right, what today will hold and what questions I will get asked today. There is no single template for that. And that's quite a mindset change. So I would, if I was a person in surveillance who thought I might be quite good in an advisory function, you kind of want to try and get some exposures. Start off with some shadowing, maybe, sort of kind of have a day just sitting on the desk and seeing, what that looks like. If that looks like, that might be quite a positive experience. Then you might ask whether, you could periodically, or whether there's a way for you to, is there a spare desk where I might spend some more time?
How much are you in control of your own day when you move into advisory? The reason I ask that is actually from people speaking to people that have made the opposite move, right? People that have been leading an advisory team and then have moved to be a head of compliance. And a lot of them have said to us that initial 30 days is baffling, because you go from having a desk on the floor where people come to you non-stop with problems, issues, questions, queries, etc. So even if you planned a day, you don't really get to run your day because fundamentally it's dictated by what's going on around you. And then all of a sudden you're in an office, wherever you are, sometimes even on a different floor, and no one comes to you. And in that, guys, you've got, in theory, all the time in the world, but in practice, all the responsibility around you. How much do you, how do you get to control your day as a global head of advisory?
Well, with great difficulty, obviously, and actually the great attraction of the job is that I don't control it. It's actually, that's the bit of the job that I enjoy the most. It's no 2 days are the same.
So would you find it hard to transition to a role where you have to structure it yourself then, or?
To move to a head of compliance role, for me, that would be difficult. Yes. Without a shadow of a doubt. Because it's very administrative. So it becomes quite processy and not the sort of thing that. Not really the sort of thing. It's that sort of flip from the surveillance to that. It's like going back that way to doing all the administration for the department, for the compliance department. I think that's it. When you think about that head of compliance role, it's the administrator for the compliance department. Whereas I'm an advisor to the business. And that's how I would distinguish the two roles.
Makes sense. Is there any other learning tools or growth development kind of pieces out there that people can do? We've had a few people say to us, if you're looking to make change or looking to shuffle, do you see ISI or one of the other qualifications? Are you? We
offer the ability to undertake that course, but it's not a requirement. And for me, it's learning on the job. There's nothing better than that. So an ICI, yes, nice, helpful. Will it get you the job? No.
When you say will it get you the job, if you've got 5 applicants to an open job and one's got the CISI and the other 4 don't,
that would not be a determining factor.
Fine.
It'll be how they perform in the interview itself. And through some sort of scenarios. Again, I go back to what I said earlier. There's not necessarily a right or a wrong answer. But it's how you get to that point of whatever the answer you think is the right one. It's about instincts of that person, for the junior people.
So, and if we're giving advice to people in that context, right? Like often people with skills have technical focused interviews rather than competency focused interviews. But from what you're saying today, if someone goes into a technical interview and doesn't have the coverage, the advice, I'm reading between the lines, but the advice is talk through the structure of how you would go about it, even if you don't necessarily know the answer. Right? I've never covered that before. However, I'm assuming from my exposure to XYZ, this is how I'd go about.
And that would be all, not only the analyst associate level, but also at VP. we're not setting you up for failure. Right? We want you to succeed. So it's about seeing whether you are, how well suited you are to the role.
And when you've done interviews, I'm lucky enough, obviously, to have recruited for you at SocGen and at Nomura and at Deutsche and at Bank of America. So we've been through a few journeys together, but they're all quite different recruitment processes. Guidance to people, I say the same thing, right? The CV is the key to get in the door. But when you're looking at CVs, because you've talked about what's important in an interview, but when you're looking at CVs, what matters to you? What are you searching for? What stands out?
I suppose it depends on the level we're recruiting at. If it's at a very junior level, then it's the sort of 1-2 years experience that you've had. Given I work in a bank, then I'm looking for some banking experience and something that, and it doesn't have to be in an advisory role. But it'd be sort of like, I'd be looking for something, you know, some sort of transferable skills. So something that's in your CV that allows me to think, you were doing this in this role. I could probably use that in my role that I'm recruiting for. So that's sort of a little bit of a read across.
But and so let's take that to the basic level, right? You imagine you're doing a SMCR focus role, doing the registrations and deregistrations. In theory, there's no natural overlap with the advisory world. But if someone writes about how they've gone about engaging with the people from the business to do that role, that starts to make a difference, or?
I suppose, yes. There's I think it's quite a good story where somebody had applied for a role in, and their only experience had been in a supermarket, but they were doing. I don't want to say stacking shelves, but they were literally. But that was sort of all about rotation. And making sure that the tins or whatever had been on the shelf the longest actually naturally came to the front. So there was an orderly process in terms of what they needed to do, and the way that they articulated it sort of all of a sudden elevated maybe my preconceived idea of what stacking shelves looks like. So it was sort of like, there's a transferable skill. There's a process to be followed here, and it's a very well documented process. And so
that makes sense. It's interesting to hear it, because we encourage people only to talk about their experience on a CV, right? A lot of I know a lot of people write about hobbies and skills and stuff like that. We often encourage people to take them off, only because whatever I write, I love football, and a hiring manager reads it and goes, well, I don't like football, we're not going to get on. It's trying to avoid those preconceptions. But actually, we also talk about prior experience, right? When people are junior, we often get CVs that say I've done 2 years in a pub and 2 years in a supermarket and these other bits and pieces. But it's interesting, just the piece that you've just made reference to is you can still make that into relevant experience by having a thought process behind it. Is AI coming for compliance advisory?
Not anytime soon.
No? No. In no way?
It'll pick up the process functions, but the advisory function, difficult. One of the things that that is absolutely critical in our role is the ability to ask that one more question. That all of a sudden unlocks everything that the business has been telling you in the previous half an hour. Which wasn't, sometimes people tell you what they think you need to hear. Right? Not what we actually want to hear. It's the ability, I think a mark of a good compliance advisor is the ability to ask that one extra question that all of a sudden unlocks everything else that they've been asking. And it gives you the ability to answer the question. So I suppose, is you'll get the answer that you put based on the question you put in. But in actual fact, AI will give you the answer to that question. But it won't understand whether that's really the question you were asking.
That makes sense. I think about that with the recruitment process as well, because we're often asked by candidates what questions they should ask at the end of the interview, right? Because most hiring managers say at the end, have you got any questions for us? And if I speak openly, I think a lot of people get completely thrown because they've pre-written like 3, 4, 5 questions, like what's the culture like or whatever. But then you come into the interview and you go, right, let's talk about the culture of the place. They go, that was my question gone, if that makes sense. There's one question doing the rounds at the moment I see on every advice video that people put out there, which is, having completed this interview, do you have any reason not to put me forward to the next round?
Ooh.
Someone says that to you, how do you respond? No, I'm glad you reacted like that though, because I see it, and part of me is like, I think some people would love that. Other people would be like, because they're sitting there thinking you're a no, and now I don't know how I justify or explain it. Or they're sitting there thinking, yeah, of course, so this is now a bit awkward, no?
Oh yes, I wouldn't advise anybody to ask that question.
Yeah.
To be honest, I think that's is that being called passive aggressive or?
Yeah.
It's yeah, I wouldn't recommend anybody. You know, there's a process.
Yeah.
You go through it.
Yeah.
And it runs its course. I don't think that sort of putting the interviewer in that position.
Yeah.
It bodes well for whether that person's going to hire you or not.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. Well, and again, so we're back on the CV and we're looking at CVs. Do academics make a difference to you? Someone have to have a certain level or a certain qualification or a...
Well, having not been to university myself,
Yeah.
Then I have to answer that honestly. No, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The experience is what matters.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I wouldn't want to put anybody off who's suitably qualified, but it's not a prerequisite.
Yeah.
So no.
Do you think it's held your career back at all, not having gone to university?
I think that it, in a way, maybe not in the way you think, is that is I had to get smarter later.
Yeah.
So when I made the move across from the exchange to Goldman, I all of a sudden had all these 36 exchanges to worry about, and because I hadn't had a sort of the discipline, if you like, of university education, and anything subsequent to that, is I came from quite a low starting point in my view. So I had to work quite a lot harder, I think, to get myself to where I considered I needed to be. It had nothing to do with me being a female, for example, but just a simple sort of analysis of, right, these people, you know, look at other people and how they answered questions and the way that their thought processes work, and I thought, I'm not there. You know, so I had to work really, really hard, maybe a lot later than people who'd been through a university education. It
is interesting. I think so much of that also depends on what you studied and where you went. I've got to think about the right way to say this so that I don't get told off for putting down people that have done what I did, right? But I did a geography degree at Southampton, and that was 8 hours a week worth of interviews, right? So when we talk about structured learning, I had so much free time and no structured learning at all. But in later life, I chose to sign up and do an MBA, and a lot of people ask me whether it's worth doing. And my personal opinion is the biggest thing it teaches you is how much you can or can't handle capacity, i.e. you might not learn bucket loads from certain pieces. Like you cover a variety of modules, and if you've worked in certain bits, you'll probably know them. Whatever, if you're a qualified accountant, the module on finance and accounting is going to be pretty easy for you. But for 2 years solid, literally every month non-stop, you've got 2,000-3,000 words that you need to churn out. So not only have you got to look after your job and your family and anything else, you've got to prove that you can constantly just churn out more work. And I often say to people, if you're thinking about progressing, that's a really good test as to whether you can do one of the bigger jobs, if that makes sense. Because in my head, correct me if I'm wrong, as a global head, one assumes that when you're at home in the evening, you're getting emails from the US, and when you wake up in the morning, Asia are already in touch. Or...
It's not too bad. I manage over the years, I've learnt to manage those different time zones, so I don't need to be, generally, if somebody needs to get hold of me, they know how to get hold of me. So I'm not these days on my email at 9-10 o'clock in the evening, for example.
And how do you achieve that? That's by trusting someone there, or?
It's about building relationships and empowering those people to do they know what they need to do, and if they need to engage me, then they know where to get hold of me. So,
makes sense. If someone wants to follow in your footsteps, what's the first step they should take?
Try and get beyond number 8 on my list. I have a sort of theory, or not theory, but a sort of somewhere, so a way of living, if you like, is if it's not in my top 5, I don't pay any attention to it. Yeah. So if it's number 8 or number 12, you often hear me saying that.
If someone wants to follow in your footsteps, what's the first step they should take?
Oh, you need to go and find a job in advisory. Yeah. I'm not sure that anybody would want to take it. It was quite a difficult path, I think, when looking back. I think it's much easier for compliance officers these days because of that credibility in front of the business, which historically was quite difficult, and all advisory teams needed to be senior in order to have that credibility in front of the business, because compliance is now a better understood topic. It's much easier for juniors. So
when do you think that started to change?
Probably after the Lehman and then LIBOR. Really.
From outside looking in, Lehman's was a turning point for us. In advance of Lehman's, a lot of compliance departments were still regarded as a box ticking and checking function that were there to prevent things happen. And after Lehman's, when we were getting roles called into us, especially advisory roles, all of the focus was personality and people engagement skills. And are these individuals able to think in a different way? i.e. we're not looking to hire someone who simply comes and says no, we're looking to hire someone that comes and says you can't do it the way you're looking to do it, however here's a different path. I think that's for me that was the turn.
Oh, absolutely. And that partnering with the business and that ability to have that credibility and them understand that when we do really have to say no, that is the line. Obviously, if there's another way we can find, but it's that seat at the table.
It makes sense.
That we want and we have. So,
Can you do an advisory role without seats on the table? I mean, there's a number of banks that don't have their advisory teams actually with seats near the traders.
Personally, I don't see how that works effectively. It's almost akin to being on a screen. So yes, you can be sort of effective, but peak effectiveness is on the floor, where they can see you, where they can easily ask questions. I noticed that there seems to be a bit of a trend in some of the houses whereby, some of the bigger houses, whereby the advisory function is no longer advising, or is actually turning into more of a process-driven function, i.e. they're clearing alerts or looking at operational risk events. I think there's still a lot of value in the advisory function, and
it's different, interesting, different approaches, because when you mentioned that operational risk piece, like we've seen legal and compliance separate and come back together. We've seen legal compliance and risk separate, come back together. At the moment, there are a variety of firms that have compliance and ops risk in the same advisory team. Some tuck some surveillance in there. Some tuck some thematic and desk reviews in there as well. Some have complete separation of them, but there is no one-size-fits-all model, right?
No, I agree, and a lot of it is quite circular, or can be, particularly when you've been around for a few years. It's like, I think we tried that one a little while ago. So yes, the reasons will be slightly different each time, but there is no one-size-fits-all, I agree.
Fair play. Cool. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
All good.